When my mother told me that my father had left $8 million in debt and that she had sold the entire $10 million inheritance to pay it off, I felt my world collapse around me. She had sold both properties, all 3 car dealerships, everything my father had built over 30 years of dedicated, careful work. My hands were shaking as I sat across from her in that expensive downtown restaurant, staring at documents that looked official, professional, absolutely devastating. Bank statements with my father's signature, loan agreements dated months before his death, creditor claims that added up to a number so large I could barely process it. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that I had a copy of the original will locked in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. What she didn't know was that I had hired an independent forensic auditor, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez who specialized in estate fraud, to verify every single claim my mother had made. And what she definitely, absolutely didn't know was that her elaborate, months-long conspiracy was about to unravel completely, thread by thread, lie by lie. The debts she claimed existed? They were fabrications, forgeries created by a corrupt attorney she'd found through connections at her country club, complete and total lies designed to justify stealing my inheritance. The $10 million she said she'd used to pay off these imaginary creditors? Gone. Transferred to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Properties sold to shell companies owned by her sister. My father's life work dismantled piece by piece and stolen by the one person he'd trusted to respect his final wishes. My own mother had orchestrated the most elaborate financial conspiracy I could imagine, all to steal the inheritance my father had left specifically, intentionally, deliberately for me. Hit that like button if you believe karma is real, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from because this story gets more intense than you can imagine. But let me take you all the way back to the beginning. Back to 6 months ago when I had absolutely no idea that the person I trusted most in the world besides my father was planning to betray me in the worst way possible. My name is Ethan Parker, and 6 months ago I was living what most people would describe as a genuinely good, stable life. I was 29 years old, working as a regional operations manager for a mid-sized logistics company called Mile High Supply Chain in Denver, Colorado. The job was decent, sometimes challenging in ways I appreciated, and the pay was solid at $85,000 a year plus bonuses if we hit our quarterly targets. More importantly, I had Sarah Chen, my fiancée of 2 years, by my side through everything. Sarah was, and is, extraordinary. She worked as a corporate attorney at Morrison & Associates, one of the more prestigious firms in Denver, specializing in contract law and corporate compliance. She's sharp as they come, with this incredible ability to look at complex legal documents and immediately identify inconsistencies, questionable language, anything that doesn't quite add up. She graduated summa cum laude from the University of Colorado Law School, passed the bar on her first attempt with scores in the 98th percentile, and had already made junior partner at 31. But more than her professional accomplishments, what I loved about Sarah was her integrity. She had this absolute commitment to truth and fairness that sometimes made her unpopular with clients who wanted her to find loopholes rather than solutions. We'd met at a mutual friend's birthday party 3 years earlier. I'd been standing by the bar at this trendy downtown venue trying to decide between an IPA and a Merlot, genuinely stuck on what I wanted. Sarah walked up next to me, ordered a whiskey neat without hesitation, and said something I'll never forget. You know, people who can't make simple decisions probably shouldn't be trusted with complex ones. It was aggressive and funny, and I was immediately intrigued. Instead of being offended, I laughed and said, "Maybe I'm just appreciating having options. Or maybe you're overthinking a choice that doesn't actually matter," she countered, but she was smiling. We ended up talking for 4 hours that night about everything from politics to philosophy to our families to what we actually wanted out of life beyond the obvious stuff like money and security. She told me she'd grown up as the daughter of Chinese immigrants who ran a small restaurant called Golden Dragon in a working-class neighborhood, working her way through both undergraduate and law school with a combination of scholarships, student loans, and part-time jobs. She told me her parents had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had, and that she believed success meant never forgetting where you came from or the people who helped you get there. I told her about my father's business, about growing up with privilege but also with this weight of expectation, about deliberately choosing a different career path because I wanted to build something on my own terms, without anyone thinking I'd just ridden my father's coattails. She respected that immediately, told me that choosing your own path even when there's an easier option available actually says more about character than most people realize. That conversation, that connection, it's probably what made me fall in love with her. We started dating 2 weeks later, got engaged after 18 months on a camping trip in Rocky Mountain National Park, where I'd planned this elaborate proposal with champagne and a photographer hiding behind trees. But it rained unexpectedly, and I ended up just asking her while we were huddled in our tent, trying to stay dry. She said yes, before I even finished the question. Our relationship wasn't perfect because no relationship is, but it was real and solid and honest. We argued sometimes about stupid things, like whether we needed a dining room table that seated 8 people when we barely knew 8 people we'd want to have over for dinner, or who had forgotten to buy groceries even though we both clearly remembered the other person saying they'd handle it. But we never lied to each other. That was our foundation, our non-negotiable rule. Honesty even when it was uncomfortable. Truth even when it would have been easier to hide things or smooth them over with half-truths. Looking back now, I realize that foundation of radical honesty is probably what saved me from my mother's conspiracy. Because I'd built a relationship based on trust and truth, I'd developed the ability to recognize lies when they were presented to me, wrapped in concern and urgency and maternal love. We were in the middle of planning our wedding, scheduled for the following April. Sarah wanted something relatively small and meaningful, maybe 80 people at a venue we actually cared about, rather than the country club her mother kept suggesting. I wanted whatever made her happy. We'd just started seriously looking at houses in suburbs like Littleton or Highlands Ranch, places where we could afford something with a yard, and good schools for the kids we talked about having in a few years. Life felt like it was moving in the right direction, like we were building toward something meaningful and lasting. My father, David Michael Parker, owned and operated Parker Auto Group, a small but successful chain of 3 car dealerships strategically located across Colorado to maximize market coverage without overextending resources. The flagship location was in Denver on South Broadway, a sprawling facility with both new and used inventory, a full-service department with 12 bays, and a team of sales professionals Dad had personally trained and mentored. The satellite dealerships were in Colorado Springs and Fort Collins, smaller operations but profitable and well-respected in their communities. Dad had started his automotive career in 1995 with absolutely nothing except determination and an almost supernatural ability to read people and build genuine trust. His first location was a tiny used car lot, basically a gravel parking area, with space for maybe 20 vehicles, and an office that was actually a trailer with air conditioning that barely functioned in the brutal Colorado summers, and heating that struggled during winter months when temperatures dropped below zero. He told me once during one of our monthly breakfast meetings about that first year. He'd sold exactly 47 cars total, working 7 days a week from dawn until well past dark, handling everything from sales to paperwork to cleaning vehicles himself because he couldn't afford to hire anyone. His profit margin that first year was so small that after paying his one employee, a mechanic named Carlos who he'd convinced to take a chance on the new business, and covering his minimal operating costs, he'd made barely $28,000. Less than minimum wage when you calculated the hours he'd actually worked. But Dad had something most people in his industry didn't have. This genuine respect for customers and absolute commitment to honesty in an industry known for dishonesty. He never pushed people into cars they couldn't afford. He never hid problems or glossed over issues. If a car had a history of mechanical problems, he disclosed it up front and priced accordingly. If a customer was stretching their budget in ways that worried him, he'd tell them directly that they should wait and save more money rather than putting themselves in a difficult financial position. That approach was revolutionary in auto sales, and it built him a reputation that spread through word of mouth faster than any advertising campaign could have achieved. By 2000, he'd saved enough profit and secured financing to buy a proper showroom building with an attached service bay. By 2005, he'd expanded into new car sales with a Ford dealership franchise. By 2010, he'd added the Colorado Springs location after a competing dealership went bankrupt, and the property became available at a price he could manage. By 2015, Fort Collins. Each expansion was carefully calculated, meticulously planned, financed responsibly with terms he could meet even if sales dropped 20%. Dad wasn't a gambler or a risk-taker in the reckless sense. He was a builder who understood that sustainable growth required solid foundations and conservative financial management. He'd say things like, "Debt is a tool, Ethan, not a trap. You borrow what you can realistically pay back on schedule, You expand when your foundation is solid enough to support the weight, and you never, ever let ego or impatience make financial decisions for you. By the time of his death, Parker Auto Group employed 93 people across the 3 locations: sales staff, mechanics with ASE certifications, detail specialists who took pride in making every vehicle shine, finance managers who helped customers secure reasonable loans, administrative support who kept the complex operation running smoothly. Dad knew every single one of them by name. He knew whose kid was struggling in school, who was going through a painful divorce, who was saving up to buy their first house, whose mother had been diagnosed with an illness. He'd show up at the service bay at 6 in the morning sometimes, roll up his sleeves over his dress shirt and help the mechanics when they were backed up with work, even though he was the owner, and certainly didn't need to get his hands dirty. He'd stay late to help a young salesperson close their first deal, sitting with them for hours if necessary, walking them through negotiations with patience and genuine teaching intent, showing them how to find the win-win scenario where both the customer and the business came out ahead. He treated his employees the way he wished he'd been treated in his early career when he was struggling and working for dealerships run by people who saw workers as disposable and customers as marks to be exploited. That approach built fierce loyalty. His average employee tenure was over 7 years, which was practically unheard of in an industry where turnover regularly exceeded 50% annually. But despite building this successful business, Dad wasn't the kind of father who pushed his children into the family operation or made us feel like we had disappointed him by choosing different paths. That was something I always deeply appreciated about him, this understanding that we were separate people with our own dreams and definitions of success. My older brother Marcus went into finance right out of college, got his MBA from Northwestern, and landed a position at a major investment firm in Chicago, managing portfolios for high-net-worth clients. He married Jennifer Hartwell, whose father was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm and whose family came from old East Coast money, going back multiple generations. They had 2 children, Preston, who was now 7, and Madison, who was 5, both enrolled at Lakeside Preparatory Academy, one of the most exclusive private schools in Chicago, with annual tuition approaching $60,000 per child. They lived in a house in Winnetka that cost over $3 million, employed a full-time nanny who spoke fluent French so the children could be bilingual by kindergarten, took annual vacations to places like the south of France and Turks and Caicos. Marcus's life looked absolutely perfect from the outside, like a magazine spread about successful young professionals living the American dream. And maybe it was perfect for him. I honestly couldn't tell. We weren't particularly close. We talked maybe once every 2 months, surface-level conversations about work and his kids and my upcoming wedding, but we never went deeper than that. There was always this sense that we were playing roles with each other rather than being brothers in any meaningful sense. I'd stayed closer to Denver but chosen logistics and supply chain management instead of automotive sales. Part of that decision was practical. I was genuinely interested in the field, and the company I worked for had good opportunities for advancement. But part of it, the part I didn't talk about much, was this need to prove I could succeed on my own merits without anyone thinking I'd just coasted on my father's success or taken the easy path of joining an established family business. Dad not only respected that decision, he actively encouraged it. He never made me feel like I'd let him down or made a disappointing choice. He never asked when I was going to come to my senses and join Parker Auto Group. Never made passive-aggressive comments about the business needing to stay in the family. Never compared me unfavorably to other people's children who had taken over their parents' companies. Instead, we developed this ritual of monthly breakfast at a place called Murphy's Diner, a no-frills establishment that served the best pancakes in Denver and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. We'd sit in the same worn booth by the window overlooking a parking lot that wasn't scenic, but felt comfortable and familiar. He'd ask about my work, about Sarah, about whether I was genuinely happy with the direction my life was taking. Not in a prying or judgmental way, but with genuine curiosity and care. He wanted to know if I was building a life that mattered to me, not to him, or to society's expectations, or anyone else. I remember one breakfast particularly clearly now, though at the time it seemed like just another pleasant conversation. It was about 8 months before he passed away, early on a Saturday morning in July. We were talking about an expansion opportunity at my company, and I was stressed about whether to accept a promotion to senior regional manager that would mean a significant salary increase, close to $115,000 annually, but would also require extensive travel, possibly 1 week out of every month visiting distribution centers across the western United States. Dad listened to me lay out the pros and cons, asked thoughtful questions about what Sarah thought, about whether the travel would interfere with our wedding planning, about whether I actually enjoyed the work enough to justify being away from home that much. Then he said something I didn't fully appreciate at the time. "Ethan, I've built a successful business and made good money, and I'm grateful for both. But at the end of your life, and trust me, you think about this more as you get older, nobody wishes they'd spent more time in airports or conference rooms or closing deals. They wish they'd spent more time with the people they love, building relationships that matter, creating memories that last. Money is important. It's a tool that gives you options and security. But it's just that, a tool to support the life you want to live. Don't let the tool become the goal itself. Don't sacrifice things that matter for things that don't." I took the promotion anyway. The extra $30,000 a year felt too significant to pass up, and I convinced myself I could manage the travel without it impacting my relationship or my life too negatively. Looking back now, I wonder if I made the right choice. But I've thought about that conversation hundreds of times since Dad died, realizing he wasn't trying to tell me what to do. He was trying to share wisdom he'd earned through decades of making both good decisions and mistakes, both successes and regrets. And I think he was probably also trying to prepare me, in his subtle way, for the responsibility I didn't know was coming, the inheritance, the businesses, the choice I'd eventually have to make about what kind of life I wanted to build and what legacy I wanted to carry forward. My mother, Margaret Ann Parker, had always been the more complicated, difficult parent in our family dynamic. She came from what she consistently referred to as good stock, which was her way of saying her family had money going back 3 generations, and she'd never experienced financial insecurity or had to wonder where her next meal would come from. Her grandfather had made a fortune in real estate development in the 1950s. Her father had been a successful corporate attorney, and she'd grown up in a world of country clubs and debutante balls and social expectations that seemed absurd to me but were her entire reality. She was elegant in that very careful, deliberately curated way that comes from decades of country club luncheons and charity board meetings and maintaining appearances at all costs. Everything about her was controlled and polished. Her perfectly styled blonde hair that she had colored and styled every 6 weeks at an exclusive salon that cost $300 per appointment. Her wardrobe of designer clothes organized meticulously by season and color, in a walk-in closet larger than my first apartment. Her modulated voice that never got too loud or too emotional, always maintaining perfect composure even in situations that would have had most people showing genuine feelings. But underneath that elegant exterior, there was always an edge to her, this way of making you feel like you were never quite measuring up to her impossible, ever-shifting standards. She'd compliment you and insert criticism in the same breath, a technique that felt more like emotional manipulation than genuine communication. "That's a nice shirt, Ethan, though I'm not sure that particular shade of blue is the most flattering on you with your complexion." Or, "Congratulations on the promotion, dear. Of course, Marcus was managing a team of 50 people by your age, but everyone progresses at their own pace, and that's perfectly fine." She had clear favorites in our family, and Marcus was unquestionably hers. The golden child who could do no wrong, whose choices were always validated and praised. He'd married Jennifer, whose father was a senior partner at a major law firm, and whose mother sat on the boards of 3 different art museums and knew everyone worth knowing in Chicago society. He'd produced Preston and Madison, gorgeous, well-behaved children who were enrolled at the right schools and taking the right lessons, piano and tennis and French. Marcus's life looked perfect from every angle, and that's what Mom valued above everything else. Appearance, status, the ability to drop the right names and memberships at dinner parties. I was the disappointment by comparison, even though I never felt I'd actually done anything wrong or made poor choices. I just lived my life differently according to values that didn't align with hers. I'd chosen Sarah, a woman Mom considered beneath our social standing, because Sarah's parents ran a restaurant instead of a hedge fund, because Sarah had worked her way through school instead of having everything handed to her, because Sarah was more concerned with competence and integrity than with which country club she belonged to. I'd chosen a career in logistics instead of something more prestigious sounding like investment banking or corporate law. I rented a perfectly nice apartment in a good neighborhood, instead of buying a house in Cherry Hills Village where Mom felt I should live. I drove a 3-year-old Toyota Camry that was reliable and practical, instead of leasing a new BMW or Mercedes every 2 years to project success I didn't feel the need to project. None of these choices meant I was unsuccessful or unhappy. In fact, I was very happy with my life, with Sarah, with the future we were building together. But they meant I wasn't performing success the way Mom demanded, wasn't giving her the ammunition she needed for her social circle conversations about her accomplished sons. Dad saw through all of Mom's status obsession, though, and he'd protect me from it when he could. He'd pull me aside at family gatherings, usually when Mom was holding court with her friends or criticizing something about the party, and he'd say things like, "Your mother measures worth in dollars and memberships and brand names. I measure it in character and happiness and impact. Don't ever let her make you feel small or insufficient for choosing substance over show. You're building a good life, Ethan. That matters more than anything." I appreciated those moments more than I could ever adequately express to him. It meant everything to have someone in my family who actually saw me for who I was, rather than constantly comparing me to some idealized version I had no interest in becoming. The dynamic between my parents had always been complex too, something I only fully understood as I got older, and could see their relationship more objectively. They'd been married for 35 years, but I'm not sure I'd ever describe them as truly happy together, or in love in any meaningful sense. They were partners in the technical, functional sense. They managed a household together, raised children together, fulfilled social obligations together, but there wasn't warmth between them. No casual affection, no inside jokes, no sense that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company or found comfort in each other's presence. They slept in separate bedrooms for as long as I could remember, certainly since I was in middle school. Dad claimed it was because he snored loudly, and Mom was a light sleeper who needed her rest. But even as a teenager, I knew that was just a convenient, socially acceptable excuse for two people who'd stopped being intimate a long time ago, but were too committed to appearances to actually address it honestly. I found out years later during one of those breakfast conversations when Dad was being more open than usual, that they'd come very close to divorce when I was in college. Mom had wanted to end the marriage, apparently, feeling like she'd sacrificed her own potential career and opportunities to support Dad's business ambitions. She'd wanted to separate, sell the house, divide assets, move on to whatever came next. Dad had convinced her to stay together until Marcus and I were fully established in our adult lives. He thought divorce would disrupt our sense of stability, create emotional complications we didn't need while we were building our careers and relationships. He truly believed it was the right thing to do for our benefit. Looking back now, I'm not sure if that decision was wise or if it just delayed inevitable pain and created even more dysfunction by forcing two incompatible people to continue pretending. But it explained so much about the coldness between them, the way they existed in the same house but lived essentially parallel lives that rarely intersected, except when social obligations demanded they present as a unified couple. 3 months ago, on a Tuesday morning in March that started like any other day, I got the phone call that would change absolutely everything. I was in a meeting with my team discussing logistics challenges in our southern distribution route when my phone started vibrating insistently in my pocket. I normally would have ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. It was Marcus calling, which was unusual because we rarely talked during business hours. I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into the hallway. "Hey Marcus, what's up? Kind of in the middle of something here." His voice sounded wrong, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Ethan, you need to get to St. Luke's Hospital right now. It's Dad. He collapsed at the dealership. They're saying it's serious." The world tilted. What happened? Is he okay? I don't know. Mom called me 20 minutes ago. I'm catching the next flight out of Chicago. Just get there, Ethan. Now. I don't remember clearly what happened next. I know I ran back into the conference room, told my boss there was a family emergency, grabbed my keys and wallet, and drove to the hospital, going probably 20 miles over the speed limit the entire way, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. By the time I got there, found parking, ran through the emergency room entrance asking frantically for David Parker. It was already too late. A doctor I'd never met, young woman maybe 35 years old with kind eyes and exhausted expression, pulled me into a small consultation room and delivered news I still can't fully process. Massive pulmonary embolism, blood clot that traveled to his lungs. He'd collapsed in his office at the Denver dealership around 9:30 that morning. EMTs arrived within 7 minutes. Incredibly fast response. They worked on him for 28 minutes, trying everything. By the time they got him to the hospital, there was nothing more they could do. "Did he suffer?" I asked, though I'm not sure why that question seemed important. "It was very quick," she said gently. "He likely lost consciousness within seconds." he wouldn't have felt much pain. I sat in that consultation room for a long time after she left, just trying to process that my father, who I'd seen healthy and laughing over breakfast 3 weeks earlier, was gone, dead at 62 years old. No warning, no decline, no chance to say goodbye or tell him everything I should have said years ago about how much he meant to me. Mom arrived at the hospital maybe 30 minutes after I did. She was composed in that way she always managed, makeup perfect, clothes elegant even in crisis. She hugged me briefly, more of a social gesture than real comfort, and asked practical questions about arrangements and notifications. I realized she'd probably already been processing this for hours while I was just beginning. The funeral was surreal in the way funerals always are, I suppose. Over 200 people filled the church, business associates and customers and employees and friends, everyone wanting to share stories about David Parker's integrity, his fairness, his ability to remember everyone's name and ask about their family. Person after person stood up and talked about how Dad had helped them, or believed in them, or given them a chance when no one else would. Marcus flew in with his whole family. Jennifer was polite but distant as always. Preston and Madison were too young to really understand what was happening. They kept asking when Grandpa was going to wake up, and Jennifer would quietly explain again that he wasn't waking up, that he was in heaven now, that they'd see him again someday. Mom moved through the reception like she was hosting a luncheon party, perfectly composed, accepting condolences with practiced grace, making sure everyone had food and drinks, introducing people to each other. I felt numb, like I was watching everything happen to someone else from a great distance. Sarah stayed beside me through everything, holding my hand when I needed grounding, giving me space when I needed to be alone, somehow knowing exactly what I needed before I did. She handled logistics I couldn't manage, called people I couldn't talk to, made decisions I couldn't make. I don't know how I would have survived those days without her. 1 week after the funeral, after Marcus had flown back to Chicago and life was supposedly returning to some new version of normal, Mom called me and asked to meet for lunch. Just the two of us. She suggested a restaurant downtown, Bistro Moderne, a place I knew was expensive and upscale. Her territory, not mine. Something about her tone made me uneasy, though I couldn't identify exactly what. There was this underlying urgency, a tightness to her voice that didn't match her usual careful modulation. But I agreed to meet her, assuming we needed to discuss estate matters or something related to the dealerships. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, a habit I'd developed from Dad who believed being on time was being late. It was one of those upscale places where the menu doesn't list prices, and the waiters wear actual tailored suits instead of uniforms. The kind of place that made me uncomfortable because it felt like everyone was performing wealth rather than just living their lives. Mom was already there despite me being early, seated at a corner table that provided privacy from other diners. She was reviewing documents from a leather portfolio, papers spread out in front of her. She looked up when I approached, smiled tightly, and gestured for me to sit across from her. "Thank you for coming, Ethan," she said in that controlled voice. "I know this is difficult timing, but we need to discuss the estate sooner rather than later. There are complications that require immediate attention." I nodded, ordering water when the waiter appeared with his practiced smile and overly formal manner. "Of course. What kind of complications?" "I figured you and Dad had everything organized given how careful he always was about planning." She slid a manila folder across the table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the surface. "Your father's attorney provided me with all the documentation. I've spent the past week reviewing every detail of the financial situation, and I'm afraid there are some serious problems we need to address urgently." Something in her voice, some quality I couldn't quite name, made my stomach tighten with unease. "What kind of problems?" Mom opened the folder with deliberate slowness, pulling out what looked like official financial statements and loan documents. Page after page of spreadsheets and legal language. "Your father had significant debts that he never disclosed to anyone in the family. Business loans, lines of credit, outstanding obligations to multiple creditors. The estate is insolvent, Ethan. There's substantially more debt than assets. We're looking at a situation where everything he built might need to be liquidated just to satisfy creditors." I stared at the papers in front of me, trying to process what she was saying. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be true. That's impossible. The dealerships were profitable. I saw quarterly reports last year when Dad was showing me expansion plans. He was talking about maybe adding a 4th location in Boulder. He wouldn't do that if he was struggling financially. Things can change very quickly in business, especially in an industry as volatile as auto sales, Mom said, her voice taking on a patient, almost condescending tone like she was explaining something simple to a child who wasn't grasping it. Your father made some poor investment decisions over the past year. He tried to expand too aggressively without proper capital reserves. He took on debt financing he couldn't sustain. The obligations accumulated faster than revenue could cover them. I picked up one of the documents with hands that had started trembling slightly. It showed a business loan for $3 million, dated 8 months ago, bearing my father's signature at the bottom. Another document detailed a line of credit for $2 million. A third showed outstanding obligations of $1.5 million. The numbers swam in front of my eyes, not quite coming into focus. How much total? I asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. Mom's expression shifted into something that looked like sympathy but felt wrong somehow. Too practiced, too controlled. $8 million, Ethan. The estate has $8 million in outstanding debt across multiple creditors. Add in the business mortgages and personal obligations, and we're looking at total liabilities that exceed assets by a substantial margin. The number hit me like physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. $8 million. Everything Dad had built over 3 decades. Everything he'd worked for, sacrificed for. Not just gone, but worse than gone. Buried under a mountain of debt that would follow the family potentially for years. What about the dealerships themselves, I asked, grasping for any hope. The properties alone have to be worth something substantial. The Denver location is on prime commercial real estate that's appreciated significantly. The inventory, the equipment, the established customer base. Mortgaged, Mom interrupted flatly. Heavily. And the creditors are already circling like vultures, Ethan. They've filed claims against the estate. If we don't act quickly and decisively, they'll force liquidation on their terms, which means we'll get pennies on the dollar for everything. We'll lose it all, and there may still be personal liability depending on how some of these loans were structured. I felt like I was drowning, like the expensive restaurant was closing in around me. So what do we do? What are our options here? This was the moment. Looking back now with the benefit of knowing everything that came after, I can see it so clearly. The way her eyes sharpened just slightly, like a predator spotting vulnerable prey. The way she leaned forward, lowering her voice even though no one was close enough to overhear us, creating artificial intimacy. The way she positioned what came next as something we were doing together, conspirators against unfortunate circumstances. I've been working with an attorney who specializes in complicated estate liquidations, she said, pulling out another document from her portfolio. His name is Richard Morrison. Very experienced, very discreet. We have a potential buyer interested in purchasing all 3 dealerships as a complete package deal. They're willing to pay fair market value under the circumstances and assume most of the outstanding debt as part of the transaction. It would allow us to close out the estate cleanly, pay off the creditors, satisfy all legal obligations, and avoid any potential personal exposure for you or Marcus. How fast would this need to happen? I asked, trying to think through the implications while my brain felt like it was wrapped in fog. We need to move within the next 2 weeks, Mom said with practiced urgency. The creditors are already filing formal claims in probate court. If we wait too long, we lose all negotiating leverage. We'll be forced into positions we can't control. Ethan, I know this is overwhelming, but we have to be smart and strategic here. Your father left us in a very difficult situation, whether intentionally or not. We can't let sentiment or attachment to the businesses cloud our judgment about what needs to be done. I sat back in my chair, trying to think clearly through the emotional overwhelm. What about Marcus? Does he know about all this? What does he think we should do? I spoke with him yesterday evening, Mom said smoothly. He reviewed the same documentation I'm showing you. He agrees this is the best and really only course of action available to us. The sooner we resolve this situation decisively, the sooner we can all move forward with our lives without this hanging over us indefinitely. That phrase stuck with me, bothered me in ways I couldn't articulate. Move forward. Like Dad's entire legacy, everything he'd built, was just an obstacle to get past as quickly as possible rather than something worth fighting to preserve. I need to see all the documentation, I said, hearing my voice sound distant and formal. The original loan agreements, the creditor claims, every piece of paper related to the estate finances. I need to review everything carefully before we make decisions this significant. Mom's smile tightened just a fraction, barely noticeable but there. Of course, absolutely. I'll have Richard send everything to you by tomorrow. But Ethan, I need you to understand that time is absolutely critical here. We can't afford to hesitate or second guess. Every day we delay, the situation gets worse. Creditors become less flexible. Our negotiating position weakens. We need to be decisive. I nodded slowly, non-committally. I understand the urgency, but I also need to be thorough. Send me everything and I'll review it carefully with Sarah. My fiancée was a corporate attorney, sharp as they come, trained to spot inconsistencies and problems in complex financial documents. If anyone could make sense of this situation, it was her. Something flickered across Mom's face so quickly I almost missed it. Annoyance, concern, fear. It passed before I could identify it with certainty. That's fine, of course, she said carefully. But please understand, Ethan, this is relatively straightforward despite being unfortunate. The numbers are the numbers. We're not in a position to negotiate with reality or wish away debts that exist. We need to deal with the situation as it is, not as we wish it could be. That night I sat at the dining table in my apartment with Sarah, spreading all the documents Mom had given me across the surface. Sarah put on her reading glasses, the ones she wore when she was doing serious legal work, and started going through everything with the kind of focused intensity she brought to complex cases. Something feels fundamentally off about all this, I said, watching her make notes on a legal pad with quick, precise handwriting. My gut is telling me something's wrong, but I can't identify what specifically. Tell me what your gut is saying, Sarah replied without looking up from a loan agreement she was studying. Don't analyze it or justify it. Just tell me what you feel. My dad was careful, almost obsessive about financial planning and risk management. He always said debt was a tool you control, not a trap you fall into. He talked constantly about sustainable growth and conservative financing. The idea that he'd let things spiral this far out of control, accumulate this much liability without addressing it or at least mentioning it to someone, it doesn't fit with everything I knew about him. It's like someone describing a completely different person. Sarah nodded slowly, still focused on the documents. These loan documents are concerning in multiple ways. My pulse quickened. How so? What are you seeing? She held up one of the papers, pointing to the letterhead at the top. This is supposedly from March of last year, but it's on letterhead from First Mountain Bank that shows their old logo and branding. They changed all their corporate branding, including letterhead, in January of last year. I know because we represented them in a trademark issue. The old letterhead wouldn't have been in use in March. This is either a very old template someone dug up or it's a fabrication. Maybe they just had old paper stock they were using up, I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew it sounded weak. Financial institutions don't work that way, Sarah said. When they rebrand, they destroy all old materials immediately for exactly this reason. Consistency and authenticity matter in banking. This is wrong, Ethan. And if this one document is wrong, we need to verify everything. She pulled out her laptop, opening it and starting to type rapidly. I want to do some serious digging into all of this. Is that okay with you? It might take several days of research, and I'll need to use some professional databases I have access to through the firm. What kind of digging exactly? County records for liens and mortgages, business filings with the Secretary of State, credit reports if we can access them properly. I want to verify every single claim your mother made, because if one thing is wrong, Ethan, other things might be wrong too. And if everything is fabricated, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I thought about Mom's insistence on urgency, her desire to move forward quickly, her careful presentation of documents that looked official but might not be. How long would a thorough review take? A few days minimum, maybe a week for a comprehensive verification of everything, but we need to be systematic and careful. We can't miss anything. Do it, I said, feeling certainty settle over me despite the fear. Mom wants us to move in 2 weeks. We have time, and I need to know the truth, whatever it is. Dad deserves that at minimum. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your dad built something real and important, Ethan. If there's any chance these debts aren't legitimate, if there's any possibility someone is lying about the financial situation, we need to know. We owe him that much at least. That week felt like the longest of my entire life. I went to work, sat through meetings, managed projects, but my mind was constantly elsewhere. Every phone call made me jump. Every email notification triggered anxiety. I was waiting for Sarah's investigation to uncover something, anything, that would explain the feeling in my gut that something was deeply wrong. Mom called twice during those days, asking if I'd reviewed the documents Richard Morrison had sent over, if I had any questions she could answer, if I was prepared to move forward with the sale. Each time I was deliberately vague, non-committal. I told her I was still reviewing everything carefully, that Sarah was helping me understand the legal complexities, that I wanted to be absolutely certain before making irreversible decisions. I could hear the tension building in her voice with each conversation. The careful composure was slipping slightly, revealing edges of frustration underneath. Ethan, we really can't afford to delay much longer. The creditors are getting aggressive. We need to finalize this transaction. I understand, Mom. Just a few more days. I want to be thorough. On Friday evening, 6 days after that lunch meeting at the expensive restaurant where Mom had first presented her case, Sarah came home from work, carrying a manila folder, and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. Serious, angry, something else underneath. Tell me, I said immediately, abandoning the dinner I'd been attempting to cook. She sat down across from me at the dining table, opened the folder, and pulled out a stack of papers covered in highlighting and notes. The debts don't exist, Ethan. None of them. Not a single one. I stared at her, unable to process what she'd just said. What do you mean they don't exist? I saw the documents. Official letterhead, signatures, everything. The documents are forgeries, Sarah said, her voice controlled, but I could hear fury underneath. Very good forgeries, professionally done, but absolute fabrications. I checked county records for liens against the dealership properties. Nothing. I contacted the banks listed on these supposed loan documents directly, gave them the loan numbers and account information. They have no record of any of these loans. The account numbers don't even match their formatting systems. I searched every public database I have access to through the firm. There are no business loans in your father's name or the business name, no lines of credit, no outstanding obligations, nothing. My hands started shaking. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. That's impossible. Why would Mom, how could, I don't understand. Sarah pulled out another document. This one clearly official with court seals visible. I also pulled your father's will from probate records, the public version that gets filed with the court. Ethan, according to the will, your father left his entire estate to you. Not to your mother, not split between you and Marcus. Everything, all of it, goes to you. That can't be right, I said automatically, my mind refusing to accept what she was saying. Mom said the estate was divided. She implied we'd all share in whatever was left after debts. There's no way Dad would cut her and Marcus out completely. Your mother lied, Sarah said gently but firmly. The will is very clear and very specific. All assets, including the 3 dealerships, the investment accounts, both residential properties, everything, is designated for you. She flipped to another page. There's also a letter attached to the will, filed as part of the probate documentation. Your father explains his reasoning in detail. He states that he's providing for your mother through a separate trust that will generate approximately $120,000 in annual income for the rest of her life, and that Marcus received substantial financial gifts during your father's lifetime totaling over $800,000, money used to establish his career, purchase his home, and support his family. The bulk of the estate goes to you because, and I'm quoting here, Ethan has demonstrated the integrity, judgment, and commitment to meaningful values that I trust will preserve what I've built and use it to create something even more significant. Tears blurred my vision. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. My father had trusted me with everything. He'd believed in me enough to leave his entire life's work in my hands, and my mother had looked me in the eye and lied about all of it. There's more, Sarah said, and something in her tone made my stomach drop even further. I checked recent property records. 2 weeks ago, your mother transferred ownership of both residential properties, the house she lives in, and a vacation property in Vail, to a Shell LLC registered in Delaware. She also initiated sale proceedings for all 3 dealerships. Ethan, she's not planning to steal your inheritance. She's actively doing it right now. The conspiracy isn't theoretical. It's happening. The betrayal hit me in waves, each one worse than the last. My own mother, the woman who'd raised me, who I'd trusted despite our complicated relationship. She had sat across from me at that expensive restaurant, looked directly into my eyes, presented forged documents, lied about debts that didn't exist, invented an entirely fictional financial crisis, and was in the process of stealing millions of dollars from me, from the inheritance my father specifically intended for me to have. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How do we stop this? Sarah's expression hardened in a way I'd rarely seen, her attorney mode fully activated. Tomorrow morning, first thing, we're going to your father's estate attorney. We're going to present everything I've found. We're going to expose this conspiracy completely, and we're going to make absolutely certain your mother faces consequences for what she's done. This isn't just unethical, Ethan. It's criminal fraud, forgery, embezzlement. She's committed multiple felonies. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, thinking about every interaction I'd had with my mother over the past month. The funeral, where she'd been so composed and controlled while I fell apart. The lunch meeting, where she'd presented those forged documents with such convincing concern. Every phone call since then, each one carefully designed to create urgency, to pressure me into acting quickly, to prevent me from asking too many questions or doing any independent verification. How long had she been planning this? Had she started before Dad even died? The property transfers happened just 2 weeks ago, but the paperwork had to have been prepared earlier. The forged loan documents were sophisticated, professionally done. This wasn't something she'd thrown together in a panic. This was calculated, premeditated. She'd been setting this up systematically while Dad was still alive or immediately after his death. Sarah had also discovered something else that made the betrayal even worse. The dealerships weren't worth the $8 or $9 million Mom had implied. Recent professional appraisals, done as part of normal business operations, valued them collectively at over $12 million. The 2 residential properties were worth another $3 million at minimum. Investment accounts, life insurance, and other assets brought the total estate value to just over $16 million. Mom had claimed the estate was worth maybe $2 million above the $8 million in fake debts, a razor-thin margin that made immediate sales seem necessary. In reality, she was trying to steal an estate worth $16 million by fabricating debts and creating artificial urgency. The scale of the theft was staggering. Saturday morning, Sarah and I met with Gerald Hutchins, my father's estate attorney. He was in his mid-60s, had known my father for over 20 years, and looked deeply troubled as we laid out everything we'd discovered across his conference table. Documents, property records, verification from banks, the will itself with Dad's letter attached. I was concerned when Margaret contacted me 3 weeks ago insisting on an expedited estate settlement, Gerald said, his voice heavy. She was pushing to bypass normal probate procedures, claiming family hardship and creditor pressure. Your father was very specific about his wishes and very careful about documentation. He even recorded a video explanation to accompany the will specifically to prevent any challenges or confusion about his intentions. "There's a video?" I asked, something in my chest tightening. Gerald nodded, pulling out a laptop from his desk. "Your father recorded it 6 months before he passed away. He was worried about exactly this scenario, about Margaret being unhappy with his distribution decisions. He wanted to make his reasoning absolutely clear. He played the video, and suddenly there was my father on the screen, sitting in the same office, looking tired but clear-eyed and completely lucid. He was wearing one of his favorite casual shirts, the blue one Sarah had given him for his birthday the year before. He looked directly at the camera, directly at me, and started speaking. "Ethan, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and there are probably questions or challenges about my estate. Let me be absolutely clear about my intentions. I'm leaving virtually everything I've built to you, not because I love you more than Marcus or don't care about your mother, but because I trust you completely with this responsibility. Your mother is well provided for through a separate trust that will give her a very comfortable income for life. Marcus received over $800,000 from me over the years, money that helped him establish his career, buy his home in Chicago, and support his family. I don't owe him more, and frankly, I don't think he'd use additional money wisely given some of the financial decisions I've seen him make." Dad shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly, his expression intensely serious. "But you, Ethan, you built your own life without asking me for anything. You worked your way up in your career on your own merits. You chose a partner based on character rather than status. You understand the value of work and integrity in ways Marcus never did. You won't waste this inheritance. You'll build something meaningful with it, something that matters beyond just accumulating more wealth. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for accepting what I'm giving you. It's mine to give, and this is my choice. Make me proud, son. I know you will." I was crying before the video ended, tears streaming down my face that I didn't bother wiping away. Sarah's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tightly. Gerald closed the laptop carefully. "Your father anticipated resistance. He included very specific language in the will stating that any heir who contests the distribution or interferes with the estate settlement will be completely disinherited and may face legal action. He wanted to protect you and protect his wishes. What do we do about my mother? I asked when I could speak again. What are our options? Gerald's expression turned grave. What she's done constitutes fraud, forgery, and potentially embezzlement depending on whether she's already moved any funds, the properties she transferred illegally, the sales she initiated without authority. All of it is criminal. She had no legal right to act as executor since she's not named in the will. She certainly had no authority to dispose of estate assets. Can we reverse what she's already done? Sarah asked in her attorney voice. Yes, but we need to act immediately. I'm filing an emergency motion first thing Monday morning to freeze all estate assets, void any recent transactions or transfers, and establish you as the rightful executor, Ethan. We'll also need to report this to the authorities. Margaret will face both civil and criminal liability for her actions. I felt numb, like I was discussing someone else's life. She's my mother. She's also someone who attempted to steal $16 million from you through an elaborate conspiracy, Sarah said quietly. Ethan, I know this is painful. I know it's your mother, but she made these choices deliberately. She forged documents. She lied repeatedly to your face. She was willing to rob you of everything your father wanted you to have, and she would have succeeded if we hadn't investigated. That was Saturday. By Monday afternoon, the legal process had begun in earnest. Gerald filed all necessary emergency motions. The property transfers were voided by court order. The dealership sales were immediately halted, and my mother received official notification that she was under investigation for fraud and forgery. She called me that evening. I almost didn't answer, my hand hovering over my phone while it rang and rang. But Sarah convinced me I needed to, that I needed to hear whatever she had to say, that avoiding her wouldn't make any of this easier. Ethan, Mom's voice was different now, completely different. The careful control was gone, replaced by sharp, undisguised anger. What the hell have you done? Do you have any idea the complications you've created? I found out the truth, I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. There are no debts. The estate isn't insolvent. You forged those documents, Mom. You lied about everything. You had no right to interfere with family business, she said, her voice rising. Do you have any idea how much your father's ego and self-righteousness hurt this family? Leaving everything to you like Marcus and I don't matter? Like we're not worth consideration? Dad left you a trust that pays you over $100,000 a year for life, I said, surprising myself with how firm my voice sounded. That's more than most people make working full-time. And Marcus got hundreds of thousands over the years. This isn't about being left with nothing. This is about you wanting more than you were given. This is about greed. You self-righteous. She caught herself, pulled back from whatever she'd been about to say. Your brother has children to provide for, Ethan. Real expenses you can't possibly understand with your modest little life. His kid's education alone costs more than you make in a year. He deserves a substantial portion of that estate. Then Marcus should have managed his money better, I replied. Dad made his choices based on 35 years of knowing both of us. His money, his legacy, his decision. You don't get to override his wishes because you disagree with them, or because you think you know better. You'll regret this, she said coldly. Turning on your own family, destroying your own mother over money. You'll end up alone, Ethan. Completely alone. I'd rather be alone than stolen from, I said. I'd rather have integrity than family members who see me as someone to exploit. I ended the call before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt something like clarity too. This was who she really was underneath the elegant exterior. Someone who felt entitled to things that weren't hers, who was willing to commit crimes to get what she wanted, and who blamed others when she got caught. The next few weeks were a nightmare of legal proceedings, depositions, investigations, and revelations that made the initial conspiracy look almost simple by comparison. The investigation uncovered that Mom had been planning this for months, possibly even before Dad passed away. She'd created the Shell LLC in Delaware 6 weeks before his death. She'd worked with a corrupt attorney named Richard Morrison, who specialized in estate fraud, and had helped forge not just the loan documents but also fake creditor claims and fraudulent financial statements. She'd contacted potential buyers for the dealerships before the funeral even happened, positioning herself as the executor and offering quick sales at below-market prices in exchange for large cash payments to accounts she controlled. She'd opened offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands to receive funds from property sales. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was sophisticated, organized crime. Marcus called me once during all of this, about 3 weeks after everything exploded. His voice was defensive and uncomfortable. "Ethan, I want you to know I had no idea about the forged debts or any of that. Mom told me the estate was complicated and I trusted her to handle it properly. I never saw any of the actual documents." I wanted to believe him. Part of me still wants to believe him even now. "You never asked to see documentation? Never questioned why you weren't involved in any of the estate decisions? Never wondered why I wasn't mentioned in any of Mom's communications with you?" "I was busy with work," he said weakly. "I assumed Mom was coordinating with you directly. I didn't think I needed to verify everything." "That's willful ignorance, Marcus," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "You didn't ask questions because you didn't want to know the answers. You were fine with whatever outcome benefited you, whether it was legal and ethical or not." He tried to argue, but Sarah had already pointed out something significant. Marcus's wife, Jennifer, had been copied on emails from Mom's attorney that discussed the estate sale. She had to have known something was happening. Marcus might have been deliberately keeping himself ignorant, but his wife wasn't stupid. The whole family had been complicit in different ways. The properties were recovered through court order. The dealerships remained under estate control, now properly managed by a temporary administrator, until everything could be finalized. And my mother faced criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. She hired expensive attorneys, which she could afford given the trust Dad had left her that she was now using to fight his wishes. They tried to play the grieving widow card in the media, painting me as a greedy son cutting his own mother off over money. Some people believed that narrative. Country club friends she'd known for decades, distant relatives who'd only ever heard her version of events, even some of Dad's old business associates who couldn't imagine the elegant Margaret Parker committing crimes. I lost relationships over it. People who'd known me since childhood stopped returning my calls or inviting us to social events. I became that guy who's prosecuting his own mother in certain circles. It hurt more than I'd expected. But Sarah never wavered. Neither did Dad's closest friends, the ones who'd known him well enough to understand his character and his judgment. Neither did the employees at the dealerships who'd worked for Dad and recognized that he would never have left his business in the financial disaster Mom claimed. 3 months after that lunch meeting where Mom had presented her fake documents and started this nightmare, the criminal case reached a resolution. Mom agreed to a plea deal that involved full restitution, 200 hours of community service, 5 years of supervised probation, and a permanent restraining order keeping her from any involvement in my life or the estate. She avoided jail time largely due to her age, lack of prior criminal history, and the fact that she ultimately didn't succeed in stealing anything since we caught her before any final asset transfers occurred. The estate settlement proceeded according to Dad's will. I inherited the dealerships, the properties, the investments, everything he'd intended for me to have. It was overwhelming and terrifying, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do with it all. I stood in the main showroom of the Denver dealership on a warm June afternoon about 4 months after Dad's death, looking at the rows of vehicles arranged perfectly, the sales office where he'd spent so many hours, the service bay where he'd sometimes rolled up his sleeves to help his mechanics when they were backed up. This was his legacy. This was what he'd built from nothing, and now, it was mine to either preserve or destroy. Sarah walked up beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about what he said in that video, about building something meaningful, something that matters beyond just making money. What does that look like for you?" I smiled, feeling certainty settle over me for the first time in months. "I'm going to run these dealerships, not as a side investment or something to eventually sell. I'm stepping away from my logistics job, and I'm going to actually do this. Dad wanted someone to preserve what he built. I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to grow it." "That's a huge change," Sarah said, though she was smiling. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. I'm also setting up a scholarship fund in his name, for young people who want to learn automotive trades but can't afford the training programs. Dad always said good mechanics were worth their weight in gold, and that skills education deserved the same respect as college degrees." Sarah squeezed my hand. "He'd be so proud of you." "I hope so," I said quietly. "I really hope so." Over the next 6 months, I made the transition from corporate logistics to running Parker Auto Group. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I made mistakes, lots of them. I had to learn on the fly about inventory management and financing programs and manufacturer relationships. I relied heavily on the management team Dad had built. People like Robert Patterson who'd been with him for 15 years and knew the business better than I ever would. But slowly, gradually, I found my rhythm. The dealerships became mine not just legally but in reality. I implemented some changes, kept most of what worked, listened to employees who knew things I didn't. The business not only survived the ownership transition but started growing. I didn't hear from my mother at all during this time. She'd moved to Arizona, according to Marcus, living with her sister in Scottsdale, maintaining her social life in a new city where people didn't know about the fraud charges. She never apologized, never acknowledged the harm she'd caused or the relationships she'd destroyed. Some people, I learned, are simply incapable of taking responsibility for their own actions. They'll always find ways to justify themselves or blame others. Marcus and I maintained a careful, distant relationship. We talked every few months, kept things surface level and polite. His wife Jennifer actually reached out once to apologize for not questioning things earlier, which I appreciated more than she probably knew. But Marcus himself never quite acknowledged his own passive complicity. It was easier for him to pretend he'd been completely innocent than to admit he should have asked harder questions. 1 year after Dad's death, I gathered all 93 employees from the 3 dealership locations for a company-wide meeting at the Denver showroom. I'd never done anything like this before, never addressed the entire workforce at once. I was nervous in ways I hadn't anticipated. "I want to share something with you all," I said, standing in front of them, trying to channel even a fraction of Dad's natural presence. A year ago, I almost lost all of this. Someone very close to me tried to convince me that my father had made terrible financial decisions, that his legacy was actually a burden of massive debt. They created elaborate forgeries, manipulated facts, and came very close to succeeding in stealing everything he'd built over 3 decades. The room was completely silent. Everyone knew bits and pieces of the story by now. Local media had covered some of it, but this was the first time I was addressing it directly with them. What stopped that from happening was that I refused to accept the lie at face value. I questioned. I investigated. I trusted the people around me who were willing to tell me the truth even when it was painful and difficult. I looked at each section of the assembled group. My father built this business on integrity, on treating people fairly and honestly, on the belief that your word matters and your work matters, and that how you treat others defines who you are. I'm going to honor those principles. And I'm asking all of you to hold me accountable to those same standards he set. An older man in the back, Robert Patterson, the senior salesman who'd known Dad longer than anyone, started clapping. Then another person joined, and another. Soon the entire room was applauding and I had to fight back tears. After the meeting ended, Robert approached me with something in his expression that looked like relief, mixed with approval. "Your dad told me once, about a year before he passed away, that he was leaving everything to you because you were the only one who wouldn't waste it. I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time. I do now. I'm still learning every day," I said. "Making plenty of mistakes. We all are," Robert replied. "But you're learning for the right reasons. You care about this place and these people. That matters more than experience or knowledge. That's what your dad understood that a lot of business owners never figure out." Sarah and I had postponed our wedding during all the legal drama, but we finally set a new date for the following spring. The ceremony was smaller than we'd originally planned, more intimate and personal. My mother wasn't there, obviously. Marcus attended but left early, some excuse about needing to get back to Chicago for work. Dad's old friends filled the gaps, people who'd known him well and believed in what he'd tried to do and build. During my speech at the reception, I raised my glass and looked at the faces of people who'd supported us through everything. To the people who tell you the truth even when it's hard to hear. To the ones who stand beside you when everything falls apart. And to the memory of people who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being real. 2 years after Dad's death, Parker Auto Group had grown to include a 4th location, the expansion to Boulder that Dad had been considering before he passed. We'd also diversified into electric vehicle sales, sensing correctly that the market was shifting and we needed to adapt. The scholarship fund had helped 12 students complete technical training programs, and 3 of them now worked in our service departments. And I'd learned that running a business my father built didn't mean living in his shadow or just maintaining what existed. It meant building on his foundation while making it something uniquely mine. I think about that lunch meeting sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. That moment when Mom slid those forged documents across the table with her perfectly manicured fingers. The convincing concern in her voice. The urgency she manufactured. The elaborate lie she'd constructed. How close I came to just accepting her version of reality. Because questioning your own mother feels fundamentally wrong somehow. But I learned something crucial through that experience. Love doesn't mean blind trust. Family doesn't mean automatic loyalty when someone is actively trying to harm you. And sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you most need protection from. The relationship with my mother never recovered, obviously. How could it? She sent a birthday card the following year with no message inside, just her signature. I didn't respond. Some betrayals are too fundamental to repair. She had looked me in the eye and lied about my father's legacy, forged documents to justify stealing millions from me. And even after being caught, after facing criminal charges, after being exposed completely, she never apologized, never acknowledged her actions were wrong. She felt entitled to what wasn't hers, and when she couldn't have it, she tried to destroy it rather than let me have it. I wonder sometimes if she regrets any of it, if she lies awake at night thinking about the relationship she lost, the grandchildren from Sarah and me she'll never know, the life she could have had if she'd just been honest and accepted Dad's wishes, even if she disagreed with them. But I also know that people like her typically don't regret their actions. They regret getting caught. They regret consequences. But they don't genuinely believe they did anything wrong. The dealerships continue to do well. I work hard, listen to my team, remember constantly what Dad taught me about treating people with respect and fairness. On difficult days, and there are plenty of them, I watch that video he recorded, his voice reminding me that he trusted me, that he believed I had the integrity and judgment to handle this responsibility, that he knew I'd build something meaningful, and I have built something meaningful, not just a successful business, though the dealerships are thriving, but a life based on the values he tried to instill in me: integrity, honesty, the courage to question things that don't make sense even when it's uncomfortable, the willingness to stand up for what's right even when it costs you relationships and social standing. Looking back at the conspiracy my mother orchestrated, I realize it taught me something I needed to learn. People will reveal who they truly are when something they want is at stake. My mother revealed that she cared more about money and control than she cared about me, about honesty, about respecting my father's wishes. But in the process of her betrayal being exposed, I discovered what I was capable of. I discovered that I could face hard truths, make difficult decisions, and build something meaningful, even when people I loved tried to destroy it. The inheritance wasn't just money and property and businesses. It was a test, and by refusing to accept the lies, by fighting for the truth even when it meant turning against my own mother, I proved I deserved what my father wanted to give me. Not because of the dollar amount or the assets, but because of what I was willing to do to honor his legacy and protect his wishes. 3 years later, I visit Dad's grave every few months, usually early on Saturday mornings when the cemetery is quiet. I tell him about the business, about the new electric vehicle line that's exceeding projections, about the scholarship recipients and the lives they're building, about Sarah and the life we're creating together, about the daughter we're expecting in 4 months who we're naming Diana after Dad's mother. And I thank him for trusting me with his legacy, for believing I had the strength to protect it when someone tried to take it away, for recording that video that gave me the courage to fight when everything seemed hopeless, for being the kind of father who saw me clearly and loved me for who I actually was, rather than who he wanted me to be. I never confronted my mother directly after the legal proceedings concluded. Some people asked why I didn't demand an explanation or an apology or some kind of closure. The truth is, I didn't need either from her. Her actions spoke clearly enough, and my focus needed to be on building forward, not looking backward at someone who had chosen greed and entitlement over family and integrity. But I did write her a letter once, about a year after everything ended. I never sent it, but writing it helped me process everything. In it, I said that I forgave her not because she deserved forgiveness, but because carrying anger was too exhausting and destructive. I acknowledged that she probably felt justified in her actions, that she'd convinced herself she deserved part of Dad's estate and that his will was unfair. But feeling entitled to something doesn't make it yours. And disagreeing with someone's choices doesn't give you the right to override them through fraud and deception. The letter sits in a drawer in my desk at the Denver dealership. Sometimes I take it out and read it, reminding myself of how far I've come from that lunch meeting where I almost believed her lies. If this story reminded you that standing up for truth matters even when it's painful, hit that like button. If you've ever had to set boundaries with family members who were trying to take advantage of you, drop a comment about your experience. Subscribe for more stories about karma, justice, and the courage it takes to protect what matters. And remember what my father said in that video, the words I try to live by every single day. Integrity isn't just about being honest when it's easy. It's about having the courage to question lies even when they come from people you love, and the strength to stand up for what's right even when it costs you everything that feels familiar and safe. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.